Welcome to the American Small Business League podcast. I am Bruce Taurus, and with me is Chris Bennett, who's running as a Democrat for the House in California's new 3rd District. Chris is a disabled Army veteran and running to fight for everyday people, not billionaires, lobbyists, or genocidal foreign countries. His website is chrisforsacramento.com. Thank you for joining me today, Chris. How are you?
I'm great. We actually changed the website, so it's now bennettforca.com, mainly because after the new redistricting, Sacramento is just one part of the overall district. But yeah, I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day, and it's getting cold now. So I think the longest I lived anywhere was Washington State from age 3 to 12, so I do feel a little bit more comfortable.
Well, good. Well, please tell me all about you and why you're running, and then we'll talk about our small business and women business issues that we had written you about. So tell me a little bit about you and also why you're running, please.
Absolutely. So, like you mentioned, I'm a West Point graduate, a disabled Army veteran, and I am running for Congress. I think for me, I was raised to take care of people who were weaker than me. I have 11 siblings or 10 siblings. I'm the oldest brother. So, it was always my job to take care of my little siblings. I came from a family tradition of military and public service. Most of my family members were veterans or teachers or nurses. So, like my family, I followed in those footsteps, and I only applied to one school for undergrad, and that was the United States Military Academy. And I commissioned as a second lieutenant into the field artillery. When I commissioned, I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And West Point, they really drill home honor, integrity, and personal courage. And I really internalized those values. So I'm someone who keeps my oaths because I want to be a man of honor. I think the big thing that got me to start running in the first place, I was actually sitting in my office and I was listening to this content creator right after this presidential election. And he was talking about how authoritarianism and fascism is not something that happens all at once. It's more like a death of a thousand cuts, where these little things happen over and over and over, and there's so many of them that you get desensitized and you don't even realize how you got where you are. And so he told his audience to grab a piece of paper and write down what your line is, that when that line gets crossed, you'll actually do something about it. And for me, that line was people getting disappeared off the street, and that started happening in April. And we've been seeing all kinds of economic uncertainty going on because of disastrous tariff policy. We've seen massive consolidation across nearly every industry for the last 50 years. And these issues really point to why so many Americans are struggling right now and why we've lost more than 1 million jobs in the last year alone. So I'm running to get big money out of politics and bring back competition to the United States. Because right now it feels like we have socialism for the ultra wealthy, and then everyone else is basically left to fend for themselves. And that's why it's so hard for most people to put food on the table, pay their rent, or try to start a small business. And I think one of the big things for me is that I'm a data guy. I got my MBA from the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley, and they taught us about macro and microeconomics. And one of my favorite economic concepts I learned about is called average propensity to consume. And an easy way to understand it is if you're a billionaire, for example, someone gives you an extra dollar. What do you do with it? Maybe you add it to your stock portfolio or you buy like a third yacht or something, but it doesn't really do a whole lot for the economy, especially not for small businesses. But if you give a dollar to someone who is struggling to get by, they're already having to pick and choose which of their basic needs they're going to meet. Once they have that extra money, they spend it immediately, and it goes much farther for the local economy because they still need to consume in order to meet their basic needs. So I think that a lot of people think that the policies and positions that I stand for are like socialist in nature, but they're actually promotive of competition. Because when small businesses don't have to, for example, shell out money for private health insurance that's tied to employment, it makes it a lot easier for them to compete with the big players that can pay infinite money, basically. So that's a little bit about the campaign. I'm a big into business. I love data, and I really care about normal people, and that's why I'm running for office.
Thank you, Chris. Talk to me about your work experience, your career, and your other expertise after West Point.
Sure. So I commissioned as a field artillery officer, but I studied computer science and actually had sort of like a concentration in information security. So while I was at West Point, I actually had an internship with Cisco Systems and also the National Security Agency. Sounds a lot cooler than it actually was. I did get a top secret SCI security clearance out of it, but when I was there, I was mainly just sitting in a boring office building and doing boring stuff. But I can't exactly tell you what that was. My first duty station, after artillery school in Oklahoma with South Korea. So I was stationed there for 2 years overseas, and I was in a multiple launch rocket system or MLRS battalion. So we had these rocket launchers that were basically on treaded vehicles and they could fire either rockets or missiles. And it was our job to die in place if North Korea ever attacked and try to delay them long enough for, reinforcements to arrive. After 2016, or yeah, January 2016, so I think it was in 2014 that the Army created the cyber warfare branch. And because I had a background in computer science and information security, I submitted a transfer packet, and I think I was like one of 10 artillery officers that got accepted into it. So when I finished my time in Korea, I reported to Fort Gordon, Georgia, where I became a cyber warfare officer, focusing on defensive cyberspace operations, especially to core and below units. So that's, everything from brigades to divisions to, companies. And a lot of that was really just about making sure that we're doing the basic safeguards to protect our networks and computer systems. I got out of the Army in 2018 to start a family with my wife, and also because it felt like they were like, "You're doing really great work, Chris. You're an amazing officer. You're gonna be a general someday. You just got to wait 15 to 20 years." And I don't think I was patient enough for that, so I decided to get out, and I got a job at Kaiser Permanente here in Northern California back in 2018, and so we moved out to Northern California. My wife's from Southern California, so she was excited to be in California. Um, I was there for about 2 years, and then I moved over to Sutter Health, which is based out of Sacramento. And then the pandemic hit in 2020. And we were getting really tired of having to commute up from Walnut Creek. So we moved up to the Sacramento County area. And this is the place that I've lived longest since I was 12 years old for 5 years. After I finished my MBA in 2022 from UC Berkeley, I got a job at PwC Strategy and where I was doing technology strategy management consulting. So lots of technology due diligences, looking at the technology stacks for different companies, understanding how they interplay with one another, seeing if they use best practices when they were doing their development work, those kinds of things. And a lot of the stuff that I've done in my job has really been looking at big data sets and trying to figure out what are the actionable insights that we can actually take away from these. A lot of companies, a lot of businesses, and a lot of localities and governments have almost infinite amounts of data. But when you actually look at what they're doing with it, it's usually just storing it and then deleting it eventually. And they're not getting a whole lot of benefit from it. And that's why it sometimes feels so hard for a lot of businesses to really get the most bang for their buck. So that's something that I brought to bear, where we looked at the data, we talked to the different groups in our organizations, figured out what their problems were, and identified how we could actually use that data to address those issues. And so that's sort of something that's near and dear to my heart, and that's something that I want to bring to Congress because a lot of our Congress members are not very up to date on technology. We've had situations where some of them don't even know how to send an email. So I think it's good for us to have people who do have that technical background, especially as we're moving towards a world where AI becomes a part of everyday life, whether we like it or not.
Thank you. Talk to me about either the major problems in your district that you want to, you know, give the good news. Like, look, these are the things I'm going to work on, and what your solutions intend to be.
Absolutely. So I think the biggest problem for pretty much everyone across the country right now, but especially here, is just the cost of living. It is extremely difficult to get by for most people. I saw some information showing that the poverty line now is like $136,000 per year, and most people are not making that much money, no matter where you're from, even here in California. So a lot of people are struggling to make ends meet. The rent keeps going up, the property taxes keep going up, and it's getting more and more difficult to insure our homes against things like wildfires. And a lot of that comes down to climate change, obviously. I know a lot of people don't like to admit that climate change is real, but what I always tell them is to look at what the home insurance companies are doing because they have the most up-to-date data. They know where the profit is, and if they're pulling out of a place like Florida or California, that's a signal that there's something very serious going on. So I think People are worried about climate change. They're worried about wildfires destroying their homes. We're also seeing that our public lands are kind of being put up for auction in a way that makes a lot of people really unhappy because people here in California love hiking, we love nature, and we love going outside. And when we're taking our public lands, increasing the prices to access them, and then giving out permits to exploitative companies to basically extract from the land and destroy the few natural surviving wild habitats that we have here, that's something that makes people very upset. And I think the biggest one, obviously, is the fact that we can't afford to live for most people. I've been talking to a lot of people throughout the district, and many of them have had to move in back in with their family members, like with their parents. Their kids are having to move back in with them. They're working multiple jobs, and if they're able to live on their own, it's a struggle where they're paying, sometimes 50% or more of their paycheck. And so we've had sort of stagnant wages for a very long time. I graduated from high school in 2008, and the federal minimum wage has not changed since then, which is kind of wild. So there's a lot of problems that we're facing, and a lot of people are struggling. And I think the reason why is because we've allowed big money influences to basically buy our politicians and decide what policies get passed. We actually saw that, I think it was a study out of Stanford, where they looked at the desires of the average person and they compared those desires to the likelihood of policy getting passed in Congress. And it turns out that what you or I want is statistically insignificant when it comes to what actually gets passed in Congress. So that's something that I want to bring to bear. I want to represent the ordinary people, working people, the people who are actually here on the ground and living here. And I think that we need to get the money out of politics because if we don't, we're going to continue seeing this slide towards authoritarianism where all of the wealth and power and money is consolidated into fewer and fewer hands, and the rest of us are going to be left behind. And I know it's a little bit inflammatory, but I want to prevent a French Revolution on American soil because if people don't have their basic needs for long enough, then eventually there's only one real recourse for them. And that's something that I really don't want to see happen here.
I don't think that's overblown because of the feeds I get. I'm a student of American history, student of current events all my life, and there are real concerns along those lines. Also, you began by talking about fascism
Yes, sir.
and the many steps and the line that you drew a line in the sand in April about people disappearing off the streets. And you might not be surprised to know that many students of American history and current events said we've been fascist for decades. If fascism is the merger of corporate and state power, which many have said that we've been that since the 1950s, and I espouse that. I am
You know,
in that camp. And I wanted to ask you the URL again. The new URL for your website again is what?
it's bennettforca.com, BENNETTFORCA.com.
Thank you. And you steer people there. What are the main things you want people to see there?
I think the big thing is that I'm not taking corporate or lobbyist money because I plan to represent ordinary people. I want to break up the big monopolies and I want to focus on people's basic needs. We all do better when we're all doing better. And one of my favorite sayings is a rising tide lifts all boats. If we actually focus on the majority of people that are sort of at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, we actually do better as a society and our economy grows much farther. We've really optimized our economy for the people that are at the very top at the expense of everyone else. And that's why we're struggling with all of these issues right now. So I think that those are sort of the biggest things. And besides that, I am what I am. What you see is what you get. I'm the same in every single context because I hate liars and I hate bullies. And I always try to make sure that I'm growing and improving as a person and also as a candidate. So I think those are the biggest things.
Thank you. Is there a primary before the general next year?
Yes, sir. So the primary is June 2nd, 2026. Now, California has a nonpartisan or jungle primary system. So rather than it being like what you see in a lot of other states where you have all the Republicans going against each other, all the Democrats going against each other, and then whoever wins goes head to head, here it's basically everyone against each other all at the same time. And then the top two by votes are the ones who go head to head in the general. So even if I get second place, that's still considered winning the primary here. And obviously the goal is to get first place.
Okay, so the primary is kind of a it's like a general primary, it sounds like. It's
Yes, absolutely.
for lack of a better. And in a state as big and complex as California, in a district part of and near the capital, Sacramento, describe the field of competition and your major strategies for success, Chris.
Sure. So, yes, we do include part of Sacramento, the city proper. We also have a lot of Sacramento County. And with the new third district, we extend north through Folsom and Auburn and Grass Valley, and then east all the way to Truckee, and then south to South Lake Tahoe. The district has two national parks at least. We have a lot of both rural, urban, and suburban communities here. And so, it's a very big district both geographically and also population wise. I think every single district in California has 700,000 plus people in it, which is more than the population of some states. So it's a lot of people, there's a lot of interests, and there are a lot of things to keep in mind. Right now, in this race for the third district, we have two people who were incumbents before the redistricting, one named Ami Bera and then one named Kevin Kiley. Ami Bera was a Democrat, Kevin Kiley was a Republican. But if you look at both of their voting records, they're pretty aligned in a lot of ways. And they're both really beholden to corporate interests and billionaire interests, which is why it feels for most people that we're just not being represented in Congress. Besides them, there's one other person who is also running, I think, out of Nevada County named Heidi Hall. She's running similar-ish to the platform that I'm running on, but it's really a lot of the consensus-driven incrementalism, which I think it made sense before, but I think that we need radical change now if we're actually going to continue to have a functioning democracy. So, in terms of strategy, there is a very large amount of land that I have to cover. So, I'm trying to visit every single locale and talk to people in all of these different places. We're going to be knocking on a lot of doors, especially in our big population centers. We're standing up groups and organizations in each area with team leads to really sort of corral and focus on the campaign in those areas. And we're also going to be going to a lot of different events. Besides that, we are maintaining open lines of communication with the electorate. Because one of the big struggles and annoyances that people face with their representatives is it feels nearly impossible to get a hold of them. Both Kevin Kiley and Ami Bera have been dodging in-person town halls for months at this point. And we've seen it with a lot of other representatives where basically the way that they get described by the media is in a rare public appearance. And in my mind, if that describes you as a representative, then you're not doing your job right. So we're focusing on the core issues that actually matter to ordinary people. Things like universal childcare, Medicare for all, affordable housing and groceries, livable wages, and bringing back real competition to businesses. And I think that that's really going to speak to a lot of people. It's been speaking to a lot of people that I've been talking to. We're also focusing on the climate and preserving our public lands and trying to fight back against a lot of these sort of what they call them greenwashing initiatives. We have a situation here in Sacramento County where I think it was about 5 years ago, they made a decision to bulldoze a bunch of public lands that were described as barren and rocky in order to build a solar farm. But it turns out that the barren and rocky lands are actually extremely fertile and wild local ecosystem with more than 3,000 old growth oak trees and vernal pools and areas that are really like the natural parts of California. Now, I love green energy and I think we need more of it, but it really defeats the purpose if we're going to be destroying all these carbon sinks and bulldozing pristine wildlands that support a lot of native ecosystems in order to build solar plants because it's the least efficient form of renewable energy when it comes to land utilization. So talking to these issues, talking to people, knocking on doors, and actually meeting people where they're at, understanding the issues that matter to them and focusing on addressing those issues. That's how we're going to win this campaign. And I'm the only person in the race who is a millennial. I'm 35 years old. I'm the only person in this race who has committed to not take foreign lobbyist or corporate money or billionaire money because my plan is to represent ordinary people and voters rather than whoever has the most money to buy me off. So I think that's something that we need across the board, and we definitely need some electoral reforms in this country. But
Mhm.
that's really sort of the overview of our strategy.
Thank you, Chris. And we wrote you to talk about our small business issues. We focus on the federal contracts that are supposed to go to small businesses. we say that we're being misled when every year the SBA says, oh, we met the goal that 23% of all federal contract dollars should go to small businesses. They say that it does for 35, 40 years. The man I work for, Lloyd Chapman, has found and shown that that's an obfuscation. That is really a corruption. That in reality, for as we see it, small businesses really are only getting 3 or 4% of all federal contracts, not the 23% that they're supposed to. And we also wrote you about our Don't Cheat Women project, which wants to raise from 5% to 15% the federal contracts that must go to women owned small businesses for a couple of main reasons. First of all, they never get the 5%, except twice in the last 30 years, the government says they did. We think every year women owned small businesses are getting less than 1% of federal contracts, not the 5%. And that figure's a joke anyway, because women own 40% of all businesses in America, and they sell what the government buys. Why should companies owned by men get 95% of the contracts? And the other points that we made to you, and I want your thoughts about these initiatives or these requests that we're making of Congress. We want to inspire you and all the candidates we can for the midterm next year to say, I'm going to do this. Um, that uh, women are economically behind men because men earn and save more. Women are doing well with higher degrees, and I think they're starting more businesses than men, but they need all the help they can get because when they have economic equality, they will have political equality. You mean they don't, Bruce? No, they don't. Because today, because men earn and save more, they donate more to candidates, so they have more influence there. They run for and win office more than women. Men hold 75% of all seats in the House, the Senate, all state legislatures, and every president's cabinet. They sit in almost that many governor chairs, and they hold 90% of party leadership and committee chair positions. And women have different priorities, values, sensibilities, wants, needs, and desires. And we need all of the human race participating in politics and policy for our country, for our communities, for our states, for our families. That's our ask as the Don't Cheat Women Project, don'tcheatwomen.com. You replied very positively when you got my letter about these things. Talk to me, please, Chris, about what all that means to you.
I'm 100% on board with all of it. I think we also saw it during COVID where a lot of giant companies got loans and relief that was meant for small businesses, and the federal government is no different. We see it all the time where, for example, like the Pentagon has never passed an audit. And that's because we're funneling a bunch of money to these private corporations, and they're completely unaccountable because they basically buy off all the politicians. So that's something that we need to do something about. And I think that our small businesses are really the backbone of the actual economy. We have two different economies in this country. There's the stock market, and then there's everything else. And we've been increasingly seeing that how well the stock market is doing is very much disconnected with how normal people are doing on the ground. And, a small business is not going to be publicly listed, so you're just not going to see a lot of data on them. And now that we're not publishing data about the economy, it's going to get even more dicey. So I definitely think that we need to do more just from the small business front. In terms of the women front, they're literally taking away women's rights left and right every single day. They just reclassified a whole bunch of professional jobs that are mainly dominated by women, saying that they're not considered like professions anymore. For example, like nurses and social workers and teachers. And this is going to have a really negative impact on our society as a whole. It's already having it. There's going to be taking away money from schools. They're going to be making it harder for people to get student loans, and it's just going to be sort of like a downward race to the bottom. So women have the most to lose right now from what's happening. And I think that one of the most frustrating things about our politics is that we only ever talk about these issues, but we don't actually do anything about it when we have the ability to do so. It was something that I saw with the Democratic Party where for decades they said, oh, we care about women's rights, for example, reproductive rights. But when we had supermajorities in the House, the Senate, and the presidency, we didn't do anything to actually codify those rights. And I believe it was because they wanted to keep women voting, but they didn't want to alienate their big donors or the people who were actually propping them up. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing now. So we absolutely need to do something about it. And I think that 15% is still pretty mild in terms of having like a women-owned proportion of these federal contracts, especially considering, like you said, that 40% of these, small businesses are owned by women. They have an economic impact of trillions of dollars. Um, I think that it's a pretty small ask, and I definitely feel like we need to do something about increasing the funding for the Small Business Administration and making it both easier to register and harder for these giant companies with way more than 100 employees to call themselves a small business because it does not make any sense.
I'm very impressed with how well informed you sound, Chris, and you intelligently emphasize what the average person, the average voter needs to hear in order to say, I might vote for Chris, And then by the springtime, they have to be thinking, I'm going to vote for Chris, but it's a good start. And yet, a lot of the things we've already talked about are much bigger, deeply entrenched, and more urgent than I think a candidate could or even should campaign on. But in a longer form interview and platform, I'd love to drill down deeper into some of the things that we've talked about because I think it's 100 times worse and more urgent than we've even been describing here. And you sound informed enough to be able to handle that level of reality and truth. We'll say. Um, just to circle back and make my point that what I'm saying right now, it's a scandal of epic proportion that big businesses are getting so many of the small business contracts. And if anybody Google searches that, they're going to say, Bruce is wrong. Look, the SBA every year says we gave 23, 24, 25, 26% of small business contracts to federal contracts to small businesses. You have to go to our site, asbl.com. They'll see the documentation, our 100 plus legal victories, the dozens of congressional investigations that found the same thing, the SBA's own inspector general reports that found the same thing. And the don't cheat women goals are just our foot in the door. We're trying to poke a little pain there and say like, hey, women need a fairer share. Oh, but even if they say they gave them the contracts, they didn't really give them the contracts because that's why it's going to take new blood, new determination in Congress like yours. And at don'tcheatwomen.com, people can see the page of what you can do. And there's a nice letter about these things that has this request and also links to find your senators, find your representative, and write them. And I think also how to contact the members of the Senate Small Business Committee and the House Small Business Committee because we write them and we call them all the time because this is a great not it's an inspiring issue that really impacts hearts and wallets, which is a nice combo to for voters. What would you repeat? What would you emphasize? What would you add to our conversation before we kind of come to an end?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, Chris Bennett running for Congress in California's third congressional district, bennettforca.com, and I'm also at Bennett for CA on all social media platforms. I think the big thing that I want to reiterate is that I'm actually fighting for ordinary people. And that means small business owners, it means workers, it means voters, and kids. My wife and I tried to have kids for a long time. We were unable to do so. But when I talk to these young people, so few of them feel optimistic about the future. And that's really who I'm fighting for. Because if we're not investing in our kids, then we're not investing in anything. So I think that's sort of like the biggest thing. But really, we need to bring back competition to our society. Because one of the things that we've been seeing is that, we billionaires basically control everything right now. And once you have $1 billion, you're not really in touch with what it means to be a normal human being anymore. The difference between a millionaire and a billionaire is $1 billion, generally speaking. And we've been seeing it where they bought up all of the media companies. They're using AI in order to promote disinformation that is beneficial to their business interests. And that's something that we need to do something about. And we're not going to be able to do anything about it if we believe a lot of the information that's being put out by the billionaires themselves. So it's extremely frustrating. For example, the biggest source of domestic terrorism in the United States is far-right extremism. But there was an article on the DOJ website that they took down because they're trying to say that it's not far-right extremism, it's far-left extremism, which statistically speaking is just not true. So it's really like this attack on data, this attack on education, and this attack on reality, where they're trying to promote an alternate version of reality. So we need to actually get out of just looking at things online and talk to other people in person, go to these different events, join local clubs, get involved somehow, because that's the only way that we're really going to beat this infinite spigot of money that these billionaires are pouring into all these different races in order to basically buy our democracy and turn it into some form of techno-feudalism. And I know it's going to be a long uphill battle, but it's a battle worth fighting. And it's something that I'm committed to doing. And I have the youth and energy for it because I don't have kids. So I think those are sort of the big things that I wanted to reiterate.
And I want to applaud your earlier referencing when the Democrats had supermajorities, they didn't do all that needed to be done themselves, which is part of why I and many believe both parties are the left foot, right foot, the two wings of this one monolithic bird. And what the bird is the fascism that we talked about earlier. It
Yep.
really is the billionaire or corporate capture and control of our government. So it takes an individual like you running who says things that make sense to Republicans and Democrats. And it is by telling us the truth about how bad it is and about how urgent it is to have an honest person who will go in there to work for the good, the true, and the real. What you just described about how much phoniness there is coming out of not only mainstream authority and the mainstream news, but it's all over social media and the internet because of AI and because of the psychological operations being played on regular people in all countries, not only just America, on behalf of that billionaire oligarchic class that really, really seems to be wanting to enslave us and dumb us down and scare us and manipulate us and even weaken us in many, many ways, shapes, and means with medicines and drugs and everything else. And you sound like you're very well informed about those things, Chris. So,
I try to be.
well, I think there's a lot more to you than we've even been able to get into because, again, you wisely have to every time you open your mouth, this, that, and the other thing that the average busy American in your district says, yeah, that sounds like me. I'll want a guy who does that, and then save the most or the worst of what you know for the appropriate conversations. And I hope that this was one. I want to thank you very, very much for your time, and we'll talk after I stop the recording about when this gets posted and things like that. But I wish you the
Absolutely.
best, and I want to thank everybody for also watching and listening today.